Welcome back to another week here on MWO Sports. Ryan Drury here. I'll be joined by Clarkey and Steve. Lots to dig into this week. We'll be joined by longtime TSN CFL analyst Duane Forde on the recent CFL announcement that they're going to be partnering up with, merging maybe with the XFL. We'll talk about what the announcement might mean for the future of the Canadian Football League. We'll also talk later on about the NHL rejoining ESPN on a 7-year mega deal worth just shy of $2 billion. What's that mean for the league? We'll talk about the Leafs' recent skid. And of course, we'll chat with wagering expert Kris Abbott on our buddy Corey Connors at the Players' Championship, the Brier, and much more here on MWO Sports, brought to you by coolbet.co.
This is MWO Sports.
Welcome back to MWO Sports. Ryan Drury here with Chris, Clark, and Steve Sabrin. We are brought to you, as always, by coolbet.co. Very pleased to be joined by a special guest, longtime CFL analyst on TSN and longtime player, of course. Duane Forde joins us. Duane, how are you?
I'm doing great. Pleasure to join you guys tonight. How are things with you?
Things are great in this weird pandemic world that we continue to live in, the Zoom world we usually refer to it as. Duane, obviously some big news, at least potentially big news in terms of the CFL after losing a season to the pandemic. They're in talks with the XFL of, potentially forming some kind of partnership. Now, Randy Ambrosie, the commissioner, has been kind of coy in interviews the last couple of days about what exactly that might mean. In your opinion, after hearing the news, what do you think it could potentially mean, Duane?
Yeah, it was the world's most vague announcement, wasn't it? It was big news, but we don't really have anything to tell you. It really does leave the door open to quite a range. Obviously, the biggest impact, the most far-reaching possibility that has been discussed, obviously would be a merger and some of the changes, the obvious changes that would go along with that, whether in terms of rules and so many other things, but I mean, quite simply, I think that this starts as simply as exchanging business practices, ideas in terms of marketing. You've got two leagues that basically on the surface, when you look at them, each one kind of has something that the other one wants and can theoretically maybe provide some direction with. I think when you look from a Canadian Football League standpoint and you look at the XFL, you kind of go, okay, well, these guys, regardless of the issues that the XFL has historically had, these guys have had decent American television contracts, and that's obviously something that the Canadian Football League would love to tap into. There's the marketing savvy and the marketability of some of the people involved with the XFL. And I think simply from the XFL point of view, when you look at the Canadian Football League, it is, quite frankly, the only other pro football league in North America that has managed to coexist with the National Football League, the only one that has managed to survive. And so I think on that very basic level, there's kind of a starting point in terms of, okay, how can we help each other? And then, as I said, quite a range from there in terms of what the word collaborate could mean.
Duane, why do you think the commissioner came out and made the announcement? As you said, it was sort of a bizarre announcement. What do you think was it?
I think that on at least a small motion and marketing aspect of it, that that quite frankly, you look at all the talk that two leagues that, for all intents and purposes, neither of these leagues played a full season in 2020. And there's a pretty good chance that neither of these leagues plays a full season in 2021, but everybody's talking about both of them right now. And so I think that on some small level, I think that there's motivation there, obviously, for both of them to kind of come out at this time and get themselves on the front page of everybody's sports section.
Duane, this isn't the first time that the CFL has gone into the U.S. market. I mean, you go back to the days of Baltimore and Shreveport when they had that expansion that lasted a couple of seasons. Mm-hmm. So there's a history of success in broadening, I guess, the scope. But it's definitely different because that was CFL controlled. And this is two parties that would have to cooperate.
Yeah, absolutely. This is very different. And I think that for a lot of longtime Canadian Football League fans, I think this news is probably met with a little bit of trepidation, right? You look at the history of the Canadian Football League, just the tradition involved in it. And it has often been talked about the fact that the Canadian Football League fan base is a little bit older fan base. And, being part of that age demographic, we don't always like a lot of big change. And so the possibility of significant changes kind of makes us all a little wary. But having said that, I have always been a proponent that I think one of the, for lack of a better word, weaknesses of the Canadian Football League in terms of the way it operates is sometimes doing things a certain way simply because that's how they've always done them. And I think that's something that has gotten the league into a little bit of trouble. And obviously it's something from a business point of view that Commissioner Randy Ambrosie recognizes that, there's been so much talk about we need to fix our business model. And, ultimately, I don't know what the involvement of the XFL will be or might be in terms of doing that. But, I do think that there's potential for some positive coming out of an injection of outside thought and maybe getting some outside eyes on this as well, right?
So, Duane, like Steve just mentioned, the CFL has had a foray into the United States market a couple different times with, we'll call it mitigated success, I guess. Let's just pretend for a second that Randy Ambrosie came out this week and said, we're combining, we're going to be one big league. Like you just said, Canadian viewers up here, we hold the CFL very dear. Our rules are different. We celebrate that. And then in the American side of things, our rules don't really play down there with fans. So I kind of thought of this. Let's assume that the leagues are combining. Do they maybe go for a baseball type format like NL, where pitchers have to hit in one league? Maybe the XFL plays under one set of rules and the CFL plays under another. And when you get to the title game, whoever had the best record, that's the rules that are played under. What would you think of something like that?
I'm not sure you could pull that off, quite honestly, in terms of the different sets of rules if ultimately they're going to play a championship game, because it would give one team a decided advantage. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting thing, because I think when you initially look at it and you think, as we've discussed, Canadian Football League fans don't want to see change, but you kind of assume that if they're bringing in these American teams and playing in American stadiums that aren't necessarily equipped to house a Canadian-sized field, that American audience, American being the bigger audience, and obviously the probably more lucrative television contract, that there may be a desire driven by those things to play American rules. But then, I also look from the point of view that the XFL is so built on being entertaining, which hasn't always been, I would say, the motivation of the National Football League. But the XFL is so much about entertainment. And, is there a more fan-friendly brand of football than Canadian football? The bigger field, 3-down football, throwing lots, kick returns instead of fair catches, punt returns, wide open special teams play, those sorts of things. And, you start to think about the way that the style of play has gone, even in the National Football League, and think about how much that they have adapted from Canadian football. When you think about now compared to a generation ago, much more mobile quarterbacks, replacing tight ends with another wide receiver on the field, an additional cover guy playing on defense, and those things, that there are so many aspects of the Canadian game starting to seep into 11-man American football that you kind of go, well, if they were to merge, why wouldn't they try to play Canadian rules? Because I think that it is, quite honestly, a more entertaining brand of football.
I think you're right. I think the 3 downs really, emphasizes the passing game, which I enjoy. And, there's as a diehard CFL guy, which I am, and a diehard Argonaut fan. In fact, it's kind of weird because I'm a Argo fan, but I'm also a Ticats fan. But I don't really want to get into that, which is very strange, I know. But is there a rule that you would say they can't lose this one? Like, would you, if you were the commissioner, really fight for the 3 downs or really fight for one particular rule, Duane?
I'll tell you what, if I were the commissioner, I'd be fighting for all of them, quite frankly, because I think that there are so many of the rules in Canadian football that kind of fit together, right? Like playing 3 downs means you're throwing the ball more, wide open play, 12 men, you kind of need the bigger field, right? So all of these things go together that it's hard to pick one, but I would say, honestly, if I were going to pick one that I personally would fight for, and it was something that became an issue with the last foray into American expansion in the mid-90s, it would have to do with the ratio. And, I think that you need to have, in playing Canadian football, you need to have Canadian players, a place for Canadian players, and you need to find a way around labor laws in the United States to get Canadian players on the rosters of American teams if this is something we're going to do. And again, obviously we may be getting ahead of ourselves when we start talking about a merger, but if it's a possibility, you better know what sort of what your deal breakers are.
Going back into your past and your playing day, to you, how has the game in Canada evolved from when you suited up?
I would say that it almost starts at youth levels, I mean, not even necessarily grassroots football, but when I look at high school football, university football, Canadian kids coming into the league are so much more prepared, are so much more advanced as football players than what they were a generation ago. For me as a guy who loves the draft as I do, and I'm at the combine every year, you can see it, for me, I've been at the combine every year going back to 2005. I had my own combine experience in 1991. And even just looking at the level of physical preparation of guys when they come into the combine, if you sort of took pictures every decade, 1991, 2001, 2011, 2021, you would see a marked difference in, every year, just in terms of the level of physical preparation, the way guys get themselves ready to play. And as I said, coaching has become more advanced in this country. You've got a number of top guys because of the density of competition that's available in the States. You've got a lot of top kids who are playing, as has happened with Canadian basketball. We've seen a boom where we've seen a lot of the top kids going to finish their high school careers in the States and kind of get into that more competitive environment. And I think ultimately what it has done is helped grow and improve the game here.
Hey, Duane, if the commissioner wanted people talking about it, I guess he accomplished his goal. That's for sure. It'll be interesting to see how all this plays out over the next little while. Hopefully we get some CFL this year if they can get that in order. But before we let you go, be remiss if I didn't ask you about your broadcast partner, Chris Schultz, who we lost last week. Chris was actually a friend of mine. I was at the Fan 590 radio back in the 90s and brought him in to start his broadcasting career. I went down and I was friends with Mike McCarthy at the time and met with Mike and I think maybe Dave Watkins was the PR guy at the time, Mike Cosentino there as well. And they suggested I talk to this guy, Chris Schultz, this big guy. What a lovable guy. And I was heartbroken last week, as I'm sure the entire CFL family was. But just give me your thoughts on Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. It's still a hard one for me to talk about, quite honestly. The story that I'll tell you goes back to 1994 and getting ready for the 1994 season. I was a free agent. I had played out my option in Winnipeg and an opportunity presented itself for me to come home. I'm a Mississauga guy. Grew up in a family of Toronto Argonaut season ticket holders. And so there was an opportunity to sign with the Argos. And so in the middle of the off season, I went into the Argos facility, which even though they were playing at the Dome, we were still working out of this dingy little facility at Exhibition Stadium.
Yeah.
And I went in to meet with Bob Obilovich, who was the head coach and general manager at that time, to kind of talk about my situation and talk contract, kind of get things ironed out. And during the time I was in there was, I met a couple of the coaches, but there was one player in the facility, in the entire facility, middle of the off season, in there working out and watching game film. And it was Chris Schultz. And that was the first time I met Schultzy. As you probably saw a lot of stories, the tweets that people had, stories that people told about Chris, where a lot of the guys at TSN, producers and guys around the newsroom and stuff, one of the things they mention is how Schultzy wrote everything down, right? Yeah. And, I can tell you that level of preparation and professionalism wasn't something that he just developed in his broadcasting career. That was very much something that Schultzy was all about as a player. It was just something about his personality that, I think about that day. As I said, middle of the off season, and there's one guy in the facility, and it's the guy who is a 9-time All-Star and who played left tackle in the National Football League. Mm-hmm. And he's the guy in there going the extra mile. I can tell you that I never saw Schultzy that year. He never went into a meeting, never went to watch film without his notebook, that he was still always taking notes and trying to learn and trying to make himself better. And, as you guys know, in this profession, Schultzy was the consummate professional. Even more than that, though, one of the absolute best teammates, whether in football or broadcasting. I mean, we met that day in the off season before the 94 season. We have been friends ever since. One of the most loyal guys you could ever meet. And, he will be missed.
Mm-hmm. Well said, Duane. Yeah, an awful loss. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Clarkey and I did a little bonus episode on our YouTube channel where we sat down with former Argos GM Mike McCarthy to talk in depth about Schultzy and his impact on the game here. So please go check that out if you so choose. Duane Forde, 2-time CFL Grey Cup champion with Calgary, of course, played for Winnipeg, Toronto, and Hamilton. And he has been one of the premier voices on the CFL over on TSN in this country for a long, long time. Duane, we really appreciate you doing this, buddy. Let's hope that there's some good news for the CFL this year and we get some games in. That would be great. Would love to see you back on TV. Thanks so much for doing this, pal.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me, and hopefully we'll see you in the stadium. Fingers crossed.
We really hope so too. All right, we'll take a quick break here on MWO Sports, brought to you by coolbet.co. When we come back, lots to talk about. The NHL's back on ESPN. The Leafs hit a little bit of a road bump. How much are they panicking or not panicking? And of course, the Blue Jays looking pretty good in spring training lately. We'll talk about that next here on MWO Sports.
This is MWO Sports.
Welcome back to MWO Sports. Ryan Drury still in here with Clarkey and Steve Sabrin. Thanks to our buddy Duane Forde, our CFL analyst, for joining us to talk about the CFL XFL. Lots to talk about still in the sports world, guys. Let's start with the NHL, obviously announcing a landmark deal with ESPN to return hockey to the sports giant in the United States. Overall, I think this is pretty good news for the league. It was sad when they left ESPN in 2004. I think it did a lot of harm to the exposure of the league. But I think as the United States has added 2 more teams since then, in obviously Vegas and of course Seattle coming in, I think it's a perfect opportunity for them to get back into more homes that, say what you want about ESPN and their quote unquote fledgling product over the last couple of years. They are still a massive, massive giant in sports over here in North America. They still carry a ton of huge properties with huge, people on the channel that are really popular. I think this is great news. Clarkey, I'll start with you. What did you think of the 7-year deal that's worth $1.9 billion in pure revenue for the league?
I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't see how it can be a bad thing. I think what you mentioned there with exposure is one of the keys, not just carrying games, Ryan, but on SportsCenter at night. And they've been buried at times. And maybe now that they are a property of ESPN, that they will get a little bit more exposure on SportsCenter. And I think that I maybe I'm not seeing some side of things, but I would think this is a real good thing for the National Hockey League.
Steve, what were your impressions of it?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's exposure along with the money. I mean, and then you get your personalities in there as well, right? As a sports fan, and you're watching or listening to the various personalities and experts. Hopefully, what they can do is bring it to the forefront with personalities that actually mean something, and not go get, no names who nobody can relate to, and maybe get some people who don't step over the line all the time and make everything look foolish. We won't mention any names of former broadcasters who did that. But it's the money's a big part, because the NBC deal didn't really pump a whole lot of money into the system, compared to what other sports get from networks. So, that's some good money, and it'll be interesting to see how it affects the operations of the NHL, and if the players will be able to, I guess, dive into that as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because ESPN, I mean, the last hockey game they broadcast was 2004, Game 7 Cup Final, Tampa Bay, Calgary. And, funnily enough, as they come back on the league, Daryl Sutter is still the head coach of the Calgary Flames. No, it's going to be great. And I really think that ESPN has great personalities there. Obviously, you think of guys like Stephen A. Smith. Obviously, guys like that are going to have to comment on hockey more. I'm looking forward to hearing more about hockey from the guys at PTI. We know that they enjoy hockey, obviously, but Steve, like you mentioned, they got to get this right in terms of presentation. Now, in the press release, the National Hockey League said it's their goal to try and utilize ESPN to attract more younger viewers. And I think every sport would say that they want that. And if they're going to do that, they need to go about this and be very, very careful and strategic about the people that they bring in. There's talks, someone reached out right away to Gary Thorne, the legendary ESPN play-by-play guy, about coming back. If he did for a couple seasons, because Gary, no disrespect to him, is getting a little older. If he came back, I would love that. Gary Thorne was the voice on the NHL games when I grew up. You heard him constantly on NHL highlights. He's an all-time great play-by-play man. That would be something cool to bring back Gary Thorne for some of the older fans. But in terms of people that they're going to get to analyze the game, because let's be honest here, the folks down in Connecticut don't really have a ton of people on camera. You hear lots about how there's lots of hockey fans in the building, but people on camera, they don't have many guys or girls down there that I'm very confident know the game inside and out. Maybe they can comment on it and things like that, but they don't have inside knowledge of what this sport's all about. And Clarkey, you'll remember this a few years ago, ESPN gutted their entire hockey staff. They fired Pierre LeBrun, they fired Craig Custance, they fired all of their hockey staffers. Now basically they have Greg Wyshynski, who I think does a good job, but they're going to have to reload on a ton of hockey personalities. It would be neat if they brought somebody like John Bucegras back, who does a great job covering NCAA hockey. Of course, he covered the NHL on ESPN, and back in the day, Ray Ferraro, that was his first television appearances. But they have to make sure that they get some younger faces in there, some up and coming voices, and also be sure that the people they bring in represent the league well. I would be really disappointed, Clarkey, if they went and turned to somebody like, I don't know, a Mike Milbury, which, no disrespect to Mike, I'm sure he's a great guy, but in front of the camera, he is a dangerous element in today's society. I would be really disappointed if they did something like that. What are your thoughts on that and how they staff this?
I think they'll turn to the guys who are available. Like if NBC Sports, correct me if I'm wrong, they won't be doing it anymore, right? So
no,
there'll be some talent available, right? Like those guys who are working on the NBC side right now, they'll probably be available for ESPN. So we'll see, or there's new talent all the time. There's young people who are coming up. The NHL probably has a mandate to get younger, and maybe we'll see that. So, yeah, I think they'll be fine. I mean, it'll be different, but I'm looking forward to seeing what they do.
You know what? It's going to be interesting too who they zone in on to be kind of their who they pick up from the player's perspective and who's going to be the face or spokesperson of ESPN hockey. Like you look at Sidney Crosby and some of the other guys, they're getting older, right? So, and then you have Connor McDavid, who's in a Canadian market, and we know in the past that doesn't really mesh very well with American networks. Do they go to Austin Matthews, who's an American playing in a Canadian city? It'll just be interesting to see who they lock on as their kind of face of ESPN hockey from a player perspective.
Yeah, that's one element that's going to be interesting as well, Steve. Obviously, the talking heads, the former players that they bring in. I mean, I mentioned, Ray Ferraro made his first couple appearances there when John Bucegras was still at the desk, and they're going to need somebody like that people can really attach themselves to. Ray's made a big name for himself on TSN up here. If they could get somebody like that down there, preferably an American. I mean, I'm thinking of guys like Mike Modano, maybe, somebody that American hockey fans can attach themselves to. The other thing, as we move on from this, that I really hope is that this pushes the NHL to appeal to younger audiences with just better overall tech marketing, if you will. I mean, a couple of years ago, they announced that they were partnering with, Major League Baseball's data agency, if you will, that was going to manage all of their presentation and stuff. And, even still today, it's just become a lazy product. It gets neglected. I log into the NHL app tonight to watch a game, and the back screen as it loads behind the NHL logo is a still image from the Stanley Cup final in 2016. It's a picture of Yevgeny Malkin and Logan Couture. That picture's 5 years old. Like, what are you doing? So I just hope that somebody gets in there and is like, guys, we've got to try and be more current, present a cleaner product, more podcasts, whatever. Just make it as easy as possible for younger people using newer technologies to access this great game of ours. All right, let's move on to the Maple Leafs. Obviously on a 3-game skid, recording this after or during their game Thursday, of course. But Clarkey, comment on this a little bit. They were flying high after beating the crap out of the Edmonton Oilers for 3 straight nights. And now, I mean, I certainly wouldn't panic over it at all, but they've hit a little bit of a road bump against a Vancouver team that they should have beat on the second night, and a Winnipeg team that's closing them down for first place. I mean, your opinion on the losses and, your overall, not panic level, I guess level of concern, if you will.
Level of concern.
That's right.
Well, let's say last week I thought it was the best stretch in my lifetime. Remember, I said that on the show. And yeah, it hasn't been a good couple of games since. You know what? Teams are going to go up and down. They're not going to win every game. I get it. Would I love them to? Sure. Against Winnipeg, thought they ran into 2 tough goalies. Like they were out goaltended in both in the Vancouver. Like Demko played great, Hellebuck played great. Like Leafs outshot Winnipeg by quite a wide margin. But yeah, you know what? It didn't really hurt me. Like I thought I might have been a little more pissed off, but no, it's like it's okay. Things are going to be fine. It's only March. There's a long way to go, Ryan. There's a long way to go. They lost 3 games in a row for the first time under Sheldon Keefe. Oh my goodness, the world is no, it's not. It'll be fine.
Clarkey's building up some crocodile skin.
I am, man. It's like, whatever. It's like, it's okay. It's okay. Don't lose 3 in a row when we get to playoff time. Just don't do that. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe don't do that. What do you think?
I read someone saying they peaked too early. Well, what do you mean they peaked too early? There's still like a long way to go in the season. I know they peaked too early. Let's see when they peak. Let's just see. Maybe you can say that in the playoffs. Hey, they peaked back at the beginning of March. Okay.
Yeah. Well, they said that about the Tampa Bay Lightning last year too. Steve, your thoughts on it? Yeah,
you know what? The Vancouver double whammy there. That's I mean, that's tough to take it because, that's a team you got to take one of the two from. Like, I mean, that's
sure, in a perfect world, sure.
And you got a Winnipeg. I mean, much better team. And it's going to be a tough goal over, the three contests. Is there a panic? Yeah, Clarkey's right. There's really no panic at this point, but you just hate to give points back. Like you had them pinned against the wall. Your 9-point lead is evaporated to 4. So I mean, it is what it is. Could be worse. You could be Ottawa.
You could be Ottawa. That doesn't look very fun. So let's move on and talk about Clarkey's favorite Maple Leaf, Freddy Andersen. News dropping today as we record this that Jordan Binnington of the St. Louis Blues signed a 6-year extension at $6 million per a $36 million deal. He is a guy who obviously won a Stanley Cup in his first NHL season, something Freddy hasn't done. But he is a guy that has a comparable type of stat line, if you will, over the last couple of years to a guy like Freddy Andersen. And that, gets the conversation swirling in Leafland. What is Freddy going to get? Last year of his deal, he's making $5 now. Very unlikely he takes a discount on that. So if Binnington is at $6, maybe this is an advantage to the Leafs if they feel they want to keep Freddy, because I don't know that Freddy can go into obviously a longer NHL career so far, but I don't know that Freddy can go into Kyle Dubas's office in the summer or, I guess they could technically agree to an extension in the coming weeks here. I don't think he can go with his agent into Dubas's office and ask for much more than 6, if that's what Binnington got. Clarkey, what are your thoughts on that?
You know what I've thought about Freddy? Like,
yeah,
it's hot and cold, right? Like sometimes I think, man, oh man, like I think I'm just a typical fan, right? Like if they lose to another goalie, it's the first thing you think of. They got out goaltended again. Freddy couldn't make the save. Hellebuck made all the saves. Why can't Freddy steal a game? And he probably does steal games, but because you look sometimes with a critical eye at him, you don't realize he's stealing games. It's going to be interesting how this plays out. I really think it is. Like at the beginning of this year, remember, the Leafs had 4 NHL goalies basically on the roster with Aaron Dell and Campbell and Hutchinson and Freddie. And then all of a sudden, one game they had Michael Hutchinson and Wall as the backup. So they've struggled with it. I still think Jack Campbell's a heck of a goalie. Can you ride him as your number 1? Tough question.
I think it would be a mistake.
Yeah. So there's my point. You let Freddie go. You don't give him the 5, 6, whatever, $7 million. He's at what, 5 now, 5.5 now.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to want to raise for sure. Can they fit it in? The Leafs' problem with the cap, they have Morgan Riley, they have Zach Hyman and Freddy Andersen all looking for raises, and they're having trouble with the cap. So they're in a tough spot. Well, I'm going to be very tuned in to see what old Doobie does.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And you bring up the next name that obviously factors into this conversation, and that is Zach Hyman, who once again is playing fantastic right now, platooning on the third line with Engvall and Mikheyev, and they become a pretty effective line for the Maple Leafs, especially in terms of what you'd expect of a third line. Steve, your opinion on Hyman, what he could ask for? I mean, I think he makes 2.4 or something like that now. He's going to deserve a significant raise after a recent 30-goal season, and just the fact that teammates love him, he works his rear end off. I mean, if he's asking for something with at least a 4 at the front of it, how do the Leafs shuffle this? Would you do whatever you could to keep this guy around?
Well, it's funny because there's always a discussion in the past, couple of months about the Leafs and where's their energy line, who's going to be on their checking line, and this and that. And Hyman's definitely proven himself. You're going to lose somebody. Like you can't keep them all. So I mean, up and down. At this point in time, I put Hyman as a priority.
Over Morgan Riley and Freddy Andersen?
Not over Morgan Riley, but probably over Freddy Andersen. Because I mean, if Jack Campbell's hot to trot and he's going to be, the next guy leading things through, it comes down to is what have you done for me lately? And right now, Riley and Hyman are the two that are proving probably that they need to stay there. We've seen other goaltenders step in for Toronto and do the job, so it'll be. There's no right answer. Like, you can't clear cut anything at this point in time, but Hyman's definitely making a name for himself at this point.
No question. And I guess the biggest question is will he take the hometown discount? I don't know.
Right.
Does he love to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and will he take a discount? You know what the agent will say over that. He won't.
Well, why should he do it? None of the other guys did.
Right. Exactly. That's
and
exactly
he puts his body on the line more than any of those other guys.
Hey man. I know. And he's not like Joe Thornton or Jason Spezza when it comes to age. Like those guys did. They wanted to play in Toronto. Zach Hyman has a lot of good years left ahead of him. And then I wonder about Freddie. Last thought on that is, does he go down the Nazem Kadri road where, you know what, good goalie, but in the playoffs, you can't rely on him. Kadri was for a different reason, kept getting suspended. And Freddie in game sevens, numbers don't lie, Ryan, has not been good.
Yeah, it's been tough, and he needs to have a very big spring, I think, because there will be a bit of a goalie carousel potentially. I think that he's got to have a big spring to prove, hey, I deserve to still be the starting goaltender of the Toronto Maple Leafs. It'll be interesting to see what he gets after Binnington gets 6x6. All right, quick check-in on the Blue Jays. They've had a bit of an up and down spring training, but it's spring training. You can't read too much into that. George Springer finally gets into a game, and boy, he was impressive against the Tigers. He made an excellent catch in center field, something that you wish you could say about the Jays more last year, and that's obviously the biggest element he brings. Made a spectacular catch to end the first inning, the top of the first, and then he steps up for his first at bat and cranks a leadoff home run. That is the other element that he brings to the Jays. Not only is he a great leadoff hitter and can get on base like few other center fielders even in the league, he can lead off and potentially have it 1-0 by the time Bo Bichette and Vladdy Guerrero and Teoscar Hernandez step up to the plate. And then Vlad Jr. cranked 2 monster home runs today as well. He is looking lean. He's looking fantastic. His swing mechanics look a little cleaner, and he showed it off today with those 2 monster blasts today. Obviously very exciting for the Jays. The other thing that I found interesting was Hyunjin Ryu said in a recent interview that he felt like this year was potentially going to line up to be his best year. He feels healthier than he ever has. He feels more rested than he ever has. And he actually said that he felt last year that his command was a little off, and he didn't feel that he was as good as he could have been, which is pretty scary for AL East hitters and the rest of the league, because he still won best lefty in the major leagues. Well, so obviously that's good news, and they need that from him because he's their only pitcher.
Well, part of that too with the mentality, right? Look at what the Jays did in making the move to get Springer, and Vladdy comes back a little more fit. Like, if you're a pitcher, the confidence moves up the ladder a little bit, because now it's not all up to you. Like, there was a lot of pressure on Ryu last year to be at his best all the time, because the scope of mistakes was very, very small. And they always seemed to be on edge, that, you let that ground ball through the infield, then it busts wide open. They seemed a little more, I don't want to say focused, but a little more relaxed because of the moves that the club has made. So, and now Ryu can worry about who's at second or who's in center or whatever the case may be. And it's funny, yeah, these guys are pros and they make a lot of money, right? And they're expected to do well. But those are all the things that always come into a player's mind when they're getting ready. I mean, I don't care who you are. You're always going to be affected by something on the field. And if the team and organization isn't putting the best product on the field that they can, that eats away at a club. So it'll be interesting coming up to April 1st when they have their season opener against the Yankees to see what their lineup is going to be. And, it looks pretty good so far. The other nice thing, too, is over the last 3 games against the Tigers, Orioles, and Phillies, combined starters pitched 8 innings and have only given up 3 hits. So that's not too shabby. Matt's,
it's pretty darn good.
Yeah, Matt's was pitched the other day against Baltimore. It was Roark today, or pitched on Thursday. So not too bad.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And of the 45 pitches, Matt's threw 33 were strikes. So that's a positive. Real quick, guys, our friend and Mr. Listowel, they call him Corey Connors, 4 under in the opener of this weekend's tournament to the Players' Championship, the unofficial 5th major. Corey, I mean, couldn't be happier for the guy. He's just looking fantastic after placing 3rd at the Arnie Palmer. He continues to roll. You can bet we will be reaching out to him to get him back on this program very soon to talk about his impressive performances. Let's hope he keeps it up through the weekend. Quickly, gentlemen, let's touch on the Brier. Obviously, very exciting stuff. We touched on it last week, and we'll touch on it again, of course, with our wagering expert, Kris Abbott. But Steve, Pool B set, and our buddy John Epping playing really well. He'll be back on the show at some point soon, too, as well, we're hoping. But Pool A, there's still some deciding to do.
Well, you know what? It's interesting. Epping had that big win against Cooey on the second last day of preliminary play. Epping was kind of on the tipping point, needed that win, and he got it. So Cooey, Gushu, Epping, and Dunstone, the 4 going through in Pool B. And then in Pool A, pretty much set. You got Howard at top. How about those wild card teams, Clarkey? Who would have thought wild card teams would lead the pools? And then Gunlogson, Manitoba, second, followed by Botcher of Alberta, and then Northern Ontario, New Brunswick in a battle for that 4th spot in Pool A. But, top 4 teams in each pool move on to the playoff round. And, Clarkey, you mentioned it last week and asked a couple questions. That wildcard 3 team with Badaw skipping because of Howard's injury. I mean, how big is that?
It's been fun to watch. I don't know if you guys have watched, but Wayne Mataw has made some incredible shots this week.
He really has.
Glenn Howard's just sitting there thinking, man, this guy's pretty good. I'm glad I got him to skip my team. He's been pretty outstanding. And they are doing well. John Epping, as you mentioned, that game against Cooey that you talked about, Steve, there was so many rocks in play, and that's John's game. And, they had a good, we talked to Kris Abbott last week about what he needs to do to get over that hump. Well, they talked about it. They talked about him knowing now that maybe he doesn't have to make that double raise takeout to win a game. And maybe he can play a little safer in such situations. Last night, it was I think it was the 8th end. He's up 8-3, and he just kept mucking it up even more. Instead of playing peeling the guards, he just keep coming. And I think he stole 3 in the last end. So he's on his game, which is great to see. Gushu started the week poorly for his standards, but he's picked it up. So it'll be exciting. I know when this airs, we'll know what's happening. But I like Howard and I like Epping. That'd be fun.
Absolutely. It sure would be. John's having a great showing there. And like I mentioned, we will try and get him back on this show as soon as we can. All right, we'll take a quick break here. When we come back to wrap up, as always, we'll chat with our wagering expert, Kris Abbott, about our buddy Corey Connors, of course, the Brier, and some favorite bets for the finals and any other bets maybe in the hockey world that he's looking forward to this coming weekend. Stay tuned here on MWO Sports, brought to you by coolbet.co.
This is MWO Sports.
Welcome back to wrap things up here on MWO Sports for another week. Ryan Drury alongside Clarkey and Steve Sabern. We are welcoming onto the show, as always, our wagering expert, Kris Abbott. Kris, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, guys. How you doing tonight?
Doing very well. And our buddy Corey Connors of Listowel, Ontario, doing well at the opening round of the Players' Championship, tagging a 4-under first round in a 3-way tie for third. Of course, old Sergio is at 7 under, leading the clubhouse. But Corey Connors, I mean, he's really rising up the golf ranks, and I mean, his odds keep improving every week. And after performances like the Arnie Palmer, that's not a surprise where he finished third. Now, TSN had him coming into this tournament at plus 6,600 to win. Not an awful bet. I mean, I certainly don't think he'll win the tournament, but this guy is starting to put himself into the conversation of guys that you need to watch out for consistent top 10. Certainly even maybe top 5 finishes. What's Connors sitting at right now, and what's your overall impressions of the leaderboard and who to maybe lay some money on?
Well, as we speak right now, we're waiting for the odds to be recalculated. I'll tell you that he closed before the opening round at 79 to 1, so plus 7,900. I can guarantee you when that reopens, he'll be a lot better than that. But it's really exciting to have a big week last week and then roll it into this week. And in Canada, obviously, we love getting behind our golfers when they have success. And to be honest with you, golf is one of the highest percentage of wagers that come into a betting site, believe it or not. So it's exciting. I think his odds probably when they open up will be more like 25 to 1 or 20 to 1 to win the tournament when they come back on the board after his opening round. So that remains to be seen. But Dustin Johnson was the favorite coming in. He carded, I think, a 1 over in his first round. So you might gain some value on those guys. With these tournaments, oftentimes the guy who's the top 5 guys in the opening round, you don't see them on Sunday. So we'll see what happens.
So it just goes to show, I guess, if you have a hunch and you think someone's going to do well, jump on it when you can, because you know what? Turning to curling now, I thought John Epping was really going to have a good Brier. Didn't lay any money down. I'd imagine his odds maybe are not as good now as they were at the beginning of the tournament, but boy, Gushu had a rough start, back now. But John Epping, I think John's going to win this tournament. I really do.
I sure hope they do. I mean, they're a good partner of ours at Coolbet, and John's actually a good personal friend of mine through that. So I really hope he and Ryan and Brett Lang and Matt Cam and their coach Jim Wilson are able to pull this off. I mean, to be honest, coming through that pool play, especially the pool they were in, to come through that with only 2 losses and 6 wins is phenomenal. And they're set up pretty good going into that championship round. We saw at the Scotties, when you go into the championship round with the crossover, if you had 3 losses already, you were pretty much done for because you had to run the table. Now, if they're able to go, 3-1 in their crossover games, they'll have a good shot. And I think the teams in Pool B are a little bit stronger than the teams in Pool A right now. And we saw that in the Scotties as well. Pool B dominated the championship round and had all 3 teams in the final day. So, it's really exciting. I think Kevin Cooey's team has looked really, really good. They might be, the betting favorite right now. And again, because of their record, it doesn't hurt them either. But yeah, there's good odds to be had. And I said going into the tournament, Glenn Howard's team, who was 13 to 1 to win the thing, Wayne Madaw has found the fountain of youth. So that could be really exciting as well.
Cooey didn't look good though yesterday against Epping. Epping took care of him, didn't he?
He did. I mean, you got to give John's team all the credit in the world, but then, Cooey's team comes in, they're 6-0. They already had a playoff spot wrapped up.
Yeah, but you still want to win. Take
nothing away. Well, that's the thing with this format they're using now. Every game matters. Every loss matters. So I'm sure the Cooey team didn't rest on their laurels. He didn't have a great night. He was out-curled by John by a significant margin. And, hats off to Team Ontario for that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and an interesting side story as well. Positive note, it was tweeted out, of course, even on the tournament's official accounts, that obviously John Epping and Greg Smith, when they faced off for the first time ever, 2 openly gay skips facing off against each other, which is just extremely positive news. Outside of the fact that, we've had John on the show before, and we will definitely have him on again, and he's a great person. It's a positive message from the tournament as well. You can be yourself yourself and you're going to be accepted. And I think that's a really positive message to send. Kris, let's talk a little bit about the hockey scene. Obviously, we're not quite to the halfway point of the season, and some teams are a little bit better to bet on than others. After a recent 3-game skid here, and of course, we're recording this during their matchup here against Winnipeg on Thursday night, so we can't really tell you the result there. They either snapped a 3-game skid or they didn't. Would you potentially maybe hammer the Maple Leafs over the weekend simply because they're too good of a team to go on a skid for that long?
Well, at some point they're going to come back around to where they were. That's absolutely the truth. But one thing that I'm really looking at doing right now is the Winnipeg Jets are 39-1 to win the Stanley Cup, while the Leafs are 7-1. So if you think that they're on pretty equal footing, which is what it appeared to be when they got together this week in Toronto, I think the Winnipeg Jets futures price is looking absolutely phenomenal. Remember that one team from this Canadian division will be in the Final Four. So if you're going to get the Jets at a price of 39-1, I think that is a great price. And yes, the Leafs are going to come back around. Every team hits a losing skid. And, I'm not concerned about Toronto. They're going to be there at the end of the day. But I'm not in the hammer them yet. We gotta wait for them to shake it off. We'll see what happens.
Absolutely, I agree. Just out of morbid curiosity, where are my Capitals? What are the Stanley Cup odds on them? I will guess, and you tell me. I would say that they're at 13-1.
Double that, and you've got your odds for the Washington Capitals. Yeah,
jump on it, Ryan.
Right now.
Hammer it.
I am hammering that. Absolutely. They are turning it around after being one of the worst defensive teams to start the season. They are turning it around 26-1. I'll take that.
Hey, can I bet on Tom Wilson getting another 7-game suspension anytime?
This show's over. We're done. Thanks, Kris. Really appreciate you joining us. No, we're not doing that. Here's what I would say, Kris. I don't know if there are odds on something like this. Jack Eichel getting traded. What kind of percentage would you put on that? What sort of odds would there be? Jack Eichel traded this year. Plus 1,800?
Well, we may, as we get a little closer to the trade deadline, we will put up odds like what team will this player be on after the trade deadline. For him to get moved, no, I would say it's like 6 or 7-1 maybe right now. I think there's a strong possibility. I mean, I wouldn't do it, but if he's disgruntled, if he's not really that injured, I don't know the case, but he's been in and out of the lineup. And it seems to be kind of hit and miss when he was. So I don't know. There's a lot of red flags there. I mean, I thought Buffalo was going to be competitive this year. I really truly did. So I don't know what the problem is there. I'm sure it's not him, but if he's fed up and he's said it before, you might see him get moved.
Yeah, it's kind of becoming red flag central in Western New York. Our wagering expert, Kris Abbott, we really appreciate this as always, buddy. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, we will appreciate it, buddy, as always. All right, you can find the show on all the best podcast apps. We air Friday nights just after 6 on CKNX AM 920, cknx.ca. Unless the Leafs play on a Friday at 7, we air just after 5:30, lead into pregame at 6:30. Remember, you can catch all the pregame shows and Leaf games live this year on CKNX AM 920. We are on YouTube. We are on social media at MWO_sports. And of course, you can watch this show Friday nights at 8, Sunday nights at 9 with our friends on Whiteman TV at 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock, respectively. I'm Ryan Drury. That's Clarkey. That is Steve Sabrin, our wagering expert, Kris Abbott. And for our guest this week, Duane Forde of the CFL, we appreciate you listening to and watching MWO Sports, brought to you by coolbet.co.